Okay, I thought I'd talk. The other day I mentioned, when I was out planting trees, I mentioned that you have to spray the leafy spurge. Well, that's leafy spurge over there. And that whole pasture is full of leafy spurge. Now, nothing will eat that. Well, they claim that when it first comes up, before it gets a sap in it, because the stuff is kind of like a milkweed in that it will ooze kind of a white sap that's bitter. So nothing will eat it once it gets to that stage. But even when it's young, goats don't relish it, goats and sheep, but they'll eat it if they have to. But cattle won't go in there, horses won't go in there. They won't eat anywhere near that. Like here you can see where there is grass in between it. Eventually it gets so thick like that the grass, it just gets choked out. I mean, it's just nothing but spurge. And it's that way back in there. A lot of it is that. I'd say this pasture is probably down to about 50% capacity of what it could hold cattle-wise. You know, it's a shame. But leafy spurge is one of them things that came over from Europe in some seed. And it has spread in rangeland just horribly. And even spraying it, it's very hard to kill it. But at least you can set it back some and you can keep it from going to seed, because they blossom and then they form these little seed pods, and when they break, it throws the seed out and spreads it like a dozen feet from where the original plant was. That's why, like say here, this part here, I hay this every year, so I try to keep that spurge out of it. This I just sprayed, that's why you can see it's turning yellow. It takes 2 or 3 weeks actually to kill the stuff, you know, to knock it down. And I do that before I hay it so I don't spread it, you know. So it's something nobody wants to do, but you have to do, or you end up with a mess like that. And this really isn't near as bad as some places I've seen. Some pastures have just been completely destroyed. There's no grazing left in them. You know, this isn't quite as bad as some. But like I say, I hay this road going in and out. So every year I spray it. And when I spray, I usually make a point of shooting over the fence line a little, you know, trying to keep that down. Like I say, to keep it from coming in where I'm haying. You know, it's not something, you know, what I'm spraying with is 2,4-D, which has been around forever. And it isn't the actual cure. I mean, there's newly developed sprays that are a lot trickier to handle, a lot more dangerous, like to trees and stuff like that. But 2,4-D, as long as you don't put it on too heavy, it doesn't bother the grass. You know, it's a cheap spray, and it is the answer at the moment. But like in this area down here, you know, at one time everybody thought the big answer was going to be they have a beetle that supposedly will eat leafy spurge. And that was going to be the answer. So everybody was putting them beetles out. And they turned a whole bunch of them loose in this area down here. They actually had it fenced off, which is why you see there's a little jog in the fence. There used to be a line that ran that way. And they put a bunch of them beetles in there. Well, they found out they just died off over winter. You know, the hope was they would go down in the ground by the roots But that didn't work out. They just died. So you don't hear anything about those beetles anymore, though at one time that was the big thing. The one thing, the downside to spraying the 2,4-D, it will take out other brush. We have, like that brush up there is sumac, and I don't know if anything but rabbits kill sumac. But we had, used to be big patches of what was called buckbrush. Now, buckbrush, the cattle will graze right in that. That doesn't bother them at all, it doesn't faze them. It's kind of nice actually. Like a hot day, they'll lay in there. Even, so it's called buckbrush because it only grows like 2 or 3 feet high, but deer will lay in there and they'll be completely hidden right out in the open. But we were talking about that the other day. You see very little buckbrush around anymore, where there used to be big plots of that, you know. You don't see it that much anymore because people have had to spray the spurge and that's killing off the buckbrush. You know, in that place where I was planting trees, which is down over there, along that fence line, there's buckbrush in there. But that's so damp that I don't have to spray in there because spurge doesn't like damp. You know, it only grows in the dry, the high spots. In fact, that's, you know, I hay that going in and out, but I also hay this piece right here. Now, you see that real kind of dark green in the middle there? That's like a spring almost. You know, I mean, it's really soft ground in there. It's a whole different kind of grass that grows there. Spurge won't grow in there, but as soon as you get up on the hill more, get into dry areas, then you got spurge again. It's a problem that I don't really see a solution. I mean, they want to use chemicals, yeah, but that really doesn't seem to do any damage to it. Only short term. You know, I haven't seen anybody with a mess like this go in there and spray it and be done with it. They say them seeds will live in the ground for like 12 years. You know, so the only thing you can do with this stuff is spray it year after year after year. And after maybe 12 years, you'll see you'll start to gain on it. But if you miss 1 year, you're right back to where you started. But you can really tell, you know, from where I spray on this side of the fence to that side of the fence, there's a whole world of difference there. I get good clean hay out of here. But the only thing in a deal like this, like they've got cattle in here now, if they run the cattle in here for a while, graze it down so you get rid of as much grass as you can and then go in and spray it. Problem is they have it for years. Once years ago, one time they sprayed in here, but that's just a drop in a bucket. You know, if you do it 1 year, it's really a waste. I mean, you keep it from spreading further for 1 year, you know, that's all. But to actually get rid of it, it takes at least 12 years. Time after time after time. You know, they actually, like some of the newer chemicals, like I say, like there's a plateau that was developed up on this land, or down below. That works, Toradon works, but is a risky thing. And I mean, Toradon used to have a license to get Toradon. And it does work, but it tends to take trees and everything. You know, that's where 2,4-D is much milder. It just knocks the spurge down for 1 year. If you don't put it on too heavy. Put it on heavy enough, you'll burn the grass and everything. But I've learned what it can take, what works. But I also have learned that you have to keep after it year after year after year. But if you let it go like this, the pasture gets to be almost useless. You know, it's a shame to see that. Well, I'm particularly in this, but, you know, and in fact, I remember many, many years ago, the first birds I ever saw started in this little patch down here. There was a tree, an oak tree that had fallen down. And all of a sudden, somebody said, what are all those pretty yellow flowers around it? Well, it was spurge. Because it is spread by the birds too. I think doves eat the stuff and then they'll go out and they'll roost in the tree. Because somebody was saying, oh, you know, about maybe the shade kills it. Oh no, it don't care. You'll find it really heavy. Like you see that kind of a mound out there. That whole mound is covered with nothing but spurge. You won't get a cow to graze in there. At most, this pasture is now, 50% functioning as a pasture, at most. If not, it's probably like 25% really, I mean, there's very little grass in here anymore. And then you got to figure that spurge is taking up what moisture and nutrients are in the ground, so the grass doesn't get a chance to grow. And like in a dry year like this, the grass can't grow, or stunted, but the spurge thrives in dry, so there's no gain to it. But nobody wants to spray. I don't like to spray, but I know I have to spray. Well, in fact, legally, leafy spurge is considered a noxious weed, and if your neighbor, if you are consistently trying to keep weeds out of your pasture, and your neighbor is just letting it go, they are actually breaking a law. I mean, you were required to control noxious weeds. Like in farmland, say if your neighbor has tons of thistles in his land, well, you know how a thistle will seed and fly all over. You'll never get ahead of them if they have thistles. So you are required to spray. There's no answer, the bugs was going to be the big answer, but that didn't pan out. Because that's very evident here where they really pushed that idea, and it's nothing but spurge. But they did, population studies after they turned them loose, and they had this all marked out in little grids, and they do the population of how many were in there, and I thought it was funny too, because at one time they actually did that down here, because this land on both sides here is owned by the State Agricultural College. But they did a study here, but they did it right down in that low spot, which is damp, where spurge will not grow anyway. So what conclusion they could get out of there, I don't know, because like I say, it isn't going to grow there anyway, so the point of studying that made no sense. But that's why it's a little aggravating, because when they let this go like this, at one time the chemical companies were actually giving the college all the spray they needed for nothing. They just had to put it on. And then they decided that was too much work, and they just let her go. But it's tough when I look at that, pasture-wise. It's just a waste of ground. You'll see, they'll eat it down, right down to the roots in the places where there isn't spurge. But they aren't going to go in that spurge and eat it. They would starve to death before they'd go in there.